Greetings everyone. My name is Mariam Siyum. I am the English language instructor at Kelebawiyan International Academy. Today we're going to discuss about negotiation skills. And we will highlight the case study of the negotiations taking place between Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The objectives for today's lesson is first we define what negotiation is, and then we'll outline basic negotiation techniques. We'll also discuss negotiation language, phrases used in negotiations. Lastly, we will highlight the negotiation process of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or the GERD. Let's define what negotiation is. It is a process involving two or more people with different interests or goals and discuss an issue in order to reach a mutually acceptable solution. Usually, negotiation takes place between two or more people with conflicting interests with the aim of reconciling their differences. Some might even go as far as saying negotiation is a way of life or a fact of life. Negotiation is a fundamental element in the social, economic, and day-to-day life of people and organizations. Whether you are aware of it or not, you constantly negotiate for resources to ensure the maximum possible outcome for your personal and business endeavors. It is a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement, an attempt to create a shared understanding where there is or where there has previously been contested understanding. A high-stake negotiation is often a long and complex process involving several actors and several contested debates. It can be seen as a process of identifying the convergence of interests between different competing groups. It can certainly be a tiring and arduous task to undertake. Let's look at negotiation applications, or where it can be applied. There are a wide range of fields that negotiation can be applied. Negotiation can occur in a range of fields. For example, in labor relations, during minimum wage debate or salary negotiations. Secondly, in international conflicts, for example, the Syria and Libya conflicts and the negotiations taking place around them. Also the Ethiopia war, which ended with a truce after a long negotiation. Thirdly, political and constitutional issues also require negotiation, such as South Sudan power sharing negotiations that took place recently. Fourth, socio-economic development, for example, deciding which source of energy to use, such as coal versus nuclear, in which coal is dirty but cheap, and nuclear energy, which can be clean but costly. Fifth, we can consider international disputes, for example, the GERD and its water use negotiations that are taking place currently. And sixth, we can consider personal relations, for example, negotiating where to spend family weekend. Now let's go to negotiation approach and techniques. There are various ways to negotiate and various outcomes, and these different ways of negotiation determine the outcomes of the discussions. Some of them will be discussed in today's lesson. First, let's look at integrative or the win-win approach. As the name suggests, this approach aims at satisfying both negotiating parties to reach an agreement that is desirable to both. They try to reach a solution by equally compromising in order to agree on a common interest that keeps everyone happy. Secondly, we can look at distributive or the win-lose approach. Here, one party wins while the other loses. Two parties having conflicting interests will try to get the maximum outcome at the expense of the other. Third, we can consider the inductive or the piecemeal approach. This is where the negotiators start working on the smaller details and work their way up to secure the larger parts. Number 4, we have the deductive or the big picture approach. Here, all parties first agree on a common ground or common principles or common framework, then go on to agree on smaller details. So they work their way up or they work their way down from the biggest to the smallest. Okay, number 5, we have a mixed approach, which has characteristics of both inductive and deductive approach. This can be considered the best kind of negotiating approach as it allows for a well-rounded negotiating approach. So now let's look at some of the negotiation phrases, some of the useful phrases used in negotiations. When starting negotiating, you will have to establish your position at the beginning. I suggest we discuss this first. I would like to begin by saying I would like to outline our aims and objectives. There are two main areas that we would like to concentrate on, or we would like to discuss. These are the phrases you can use when agreeing in a negotiation. We agree. This is a fair suggestion. You have a good point. I can't see any problem with that. Provided, or as long as we will provide. Cancel provided. These are some of the phrases you can use when disagreeing. I'm afraid that's not acceptable to us. I'm afraid we can't agree with you there. I understand where you're coming from. I understand your position. But if you look at it from our point of view, is that the best you can offer? And these are some of the phrases you can use when clarifying a point or when asking for a clarification. Does anything I have suggested or proposed seem unclear to you? I would like to clarify our position. What do you mean exactly when you say, could you clarify your last point for me? And here, when you're summarizing the points you've agreed upon, you may use some of these phrases. Can we summarize what we've agreed so far? Let's look at the points we agree on. So the next step is, and now there is a very important language point to take note of in a negotiation. During negotiation, you would hear lots of conditional sentences. Therefore, it is one area you can apply your understanding of if sentences. For example, if you increased the order size, we could or we would reduce the price. Here you find the second conditional. Another example, so we will reduce the price by 5% if you increase the order by 5%. And here you have the first conditional. Another point is, instead of if sentence, you might also hear unless, which means if not, or as long as, and provided that. For example, unless you increase your order, we won't be able to give you a bigger discount. Provided you increase your order, we can give you a bigger discount. Now let's look at the Curriculum Plus topic, which is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and the negotiations between Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan. This is only a basic highlight and not a detailed analysis of the negotiations taking place. This has been a very long, almost 10 years long, negotiation which is still going on with a deal that is yet to be agreed. What do you know about the negotiations taking place so far? Take a few minutes to think about it and discuss with your family. There are 3 countries involved in the dam negotiations: Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan. But why are Egypt and Sudan negotiating on an Ethiopian dam? From what you've read so far, and from what you've heard on the news, what do you think are the main positions of the 3 countries? What do they all want? And how can Ethiopia secure what it wants? In a negotiation, it is very important to know what the other side wants in order to discuss the differences and agree upon a solution. Remember, the other side is your partner in the negotiation. This is Ethiopia's position. Ethiopia insists that the GERD is essential for its development and lifting of its populations out of poverty, and assures the other states that they won't be significantly harmed by the development project. And here is Egypt's position. Egypt wants their historical water shares not to be reduced and fear the dam will threaten their water amount. And Sudan, on the other side, believes or wants the water levels in its medium-sized dams not to be reduced and wants water to be released from the GERD reservoir during high drought years. So how do you think this will turn out? What compromises or concessions do you think the countries will make to reach a final deal? Discuss it with your peers and with your family. The negotiations are very complicated and sensitive to all 3 countries. and there are many more issues that go into it. For example, one key sticking disagreement between Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan is the argument pushed by Egypt to have a legally binding agreement on future water use tied with the dam negotiations. And this is not acceptable for Ethiopia. Ethiopia rejects this on the account of including all the Nile Basin countries in the general future water share negotiations, but stresses the need to separate the dam negotiations from water sharing negotiations. Now let's look at the offers proposed, or the stakes for each countries in the negotiation. For Egypt, the stake is ensuring constant flow of water during the changing seasons. Egypt wants to maintain the water levels in the high Aswan Dam during the summer seasons. For Sudan, flood waters during the rainy season which destroy crops can be controlled, and regular water supply for irrigation can be maintained by the GERD throughout the year. For Ethiopia, generation of much needed energy to facilitate economic growth and poverty alleviation. The dam can also be a tool of regional integration and cooperation in mutually beneficial development projects. So, after all these years, the negotiations are still going on, and currently they are being hosted by the African Union. Let me end today's lesson with the following questions for you to discuss with your peers and your family. How do you think Ethiopia's position would have changed if it hadn't filled the dam as per schedule? Do you think its position would have been strengthened or weakened? Do you think it would have any impact on future negotiations? If so, how? This is all for today. Thank you all for watching, and see you on the next lesson.